Renaissance humanism. So we started with the Middle Ages and we had a fundamental shift in how we define logos. That continued into the Augustine and the Scholasticism. Still, logos equals the word of God. It's continuing into Renaissance, humanism, but we're starting to fight over that. What is rhetoric? What is the definition of rhetoric? And so we've got two things happening throughout all of the figures that are going on here. And so this is where, do you need to remember names and dates? No, we need to understand the trajectory of rhetoric in this time period and the whys. So we have people fighting over, especially people who are starting to buy into the scientific method and what we can view in the natural world and how we can make notes about that and how we can systematically test it. Again, the scientific method, all of that is influencing how people think, which is getting people to question, are humans fundamentally good or evil? And so we see multiple splits happening at this time period, which has a huge impact on rhetorical theory development. We see, honestly, the start of philosophy. So psychology, philosophy, and rhetoric all up to this point have the same starting point. They all started with the ancient Greeks, actually government and politics as well. So all of them, same history, and then we hit Renaissance humanism and we start asking different questions. Okay, so we have science going in a specific direction and bringing back logic and where logic is, and in bringing back and centering logic as logos, what they do with rhetoric is they separate out style and delivery and subsume it underneath. Logic is more powerful. Logic stands alone. Logic exists outside of style and delivery, that's all rhetoric can be. That's it. As a rhetorician, I have huge problems with that, right? Because if we're not using appropriate logical language, or if we are using appropriate logical language, isn't that style and delivery already? I wasn't alive at the time period, so I didn't have to have those arguments with people. I'm a woman, I wouldn't have been able to have those arguments with people. So here we are. So science splits off and it goes in its own direction. Philosophy centers, okay, we like the idea of logic. We want to move away from the idea of the word of God being logos, but we want to center the question of, are humans good or evil, and how we understand that and how we get to that idea. And so we see a lot of theory kind of come in and out of like pure philosophy. There are great programs here and classes here on philosophy. That's not what we're dealing with here, but there is a pure philosophy that comes out of this and then it goes in its direction. And then we see rhetoric in all of the different ways that rhetoric becomes defined as this idea of stylistics, that it's only about the packaging, and all rhetoric does is put a pretty little bow on, and that bow is going to be folded in the right way and the right color for that particular audience, and that's the extent of what we're going to define as rhetoric. It's not the thinking. So we've removed invention. So if we go back to the canons of rhetoric, with invention being the first, and some of you are studying that for your activity, invention is now logic, which is completely separate from rhetoric. And that's what we're seeing develop with all of these names and all of these theorists throughout this time period. What is the purpose and the function? What is the definition of rhetoric? And for most of them, it's just style and delivery. So then our split is science goes one direction, philosophy goes one direction. And then when we come to like, what is rhetoric? It's just style. And that's it. That's what's going on at this time period. It's interesting because it's coming at the same time and coexisting with some of the scholastics that are really focused on this idea of language and what is the function and the power of language. And then we have this other group right next to it that are like, language is just language, like it just is. Logic and style, that's where we need to focus. And so we're not talking, like the ideas that we would use today, who has access and who doesn't. Not a concern. If we break down the four audiences, none of those conversations, so we're still pulling from Augustine with these four audiences, none of these conversations have to do with, like the fundamental beliefs of the value of education, until the sciences start coming in and saying, oh no, we should pay attention to this. And so now we're going to start focusing on education again and who should have access and the role of education in society and in politics, and then in the interplay between these two. But in doing that, we're looking to the Greek texts and then understanding them as, okay, they're defining rhetoric that way. We're just going to substitute logic as our term and just view rhetoric as style and delivery. And so we're going to separate, and we're going to reread, and we're going to renote, and we're going to re-understand these older texts. And so then it took a while for theorists to, teach themselves ancient Greek and translate all of the texts, for us to like revisit and rethink about these ideas, and then like really start to think, okay, so then what does that mean? What is the definition of rhetoric? But that separation between logic and style and delivery continues today. Like, a lot of the problems we're seeing in here, a lot of the splits, a lot of the disagreements are still happening. These are fundamental, like, this is why it's humanism, right? These are fundamental human questions that people deal with on the everyday, and this is where they're starting, and this is how rhetoric was involved in them. Okay, so it's kind of complicated, but what we're really looking at, what really connects all these people, is the separation between logic and style and delivery, and the shift in the fundamental question to, are humans fundamentally good or evil? And that's driving their theorizing. If you have questions, send me an email or stop by office hours.